Picture this. You're a dying alien race, and literally everyone in the galaxy has given up on you. That's exactly what happened to the Kethri, and their story is one that'll make you question everything you think you know about giving up on people. These weren't your typical aliens from the movies. The Kethri were tall, elegant beings who looked like living crystal sculptures. Their bodies caught light in ways that made them shimmer like walking rainbows, and when they moved, you could actually hear a soft chiming sound, like wind blowing through crystal bells. They'd evolved on a world where crystal formations were as common as trees, and over millions of years, they'd basically become living extensions of their planet's geology. But here's the thing, their world was dying and everyone knew it. Keth Prime sat in what galactic politicians politely called the contested zone, but what everyone else knew was basically a cosmic war zone. Picture the worst neighborhood you can imagine, then multiply that by about 1 million star systems. Two massive alien empires, the Hegemony and the Dominion, had been fighting over territory for centuries, and Keth Prime was stuck right in the middle like a house between two feuding neighbors who kept throwing rocks at each other. The worst part? Neither empire actually wanted Keth Prime. The planet's crust had been strip-mined generations ago by some long-dead civilization, leaving behind a world that was basically a giant crystal cave system with very little useful material left. And that dying star situation? That was the real killer. Keth Prime's sun was entering what scientists call the final phase. Basically, it was like watching a campfire slowly run out of wood. When the Kethri first started sending out distress signals about 3 galactic standard years ago, it created quite a stir in council chambers. Here was a species asking for help, which should have been exactly the kind of thing the Galactic Council existed for. The Council liked to present itself as this grand organization that looked out for all sentient life in the galaxy. They had beautiful speeches about protecting the weak and preserving diversity. So they sent survey teams. Lots of them. Scientists, sociologists, economists, military advisors. The works. These teams spent months studying the Kethri situation, running numbers, creating reports, and holding committee meetings about committee meetings. The conclusion? Economically non-viable for large-scale evacuation efforts. See, the Kethri had this problem that made relocation basically impossible. They weren't just attached to their home world the way humans might be attached to their hometown. It was deeper than that. The Kethri had evolved alongside their planet's crystal networks in a way that made them physically and psychologically dependent on Keth Prime's unique geological formations. Moving them would be like trying to transplant a forest by taking away all the soil and roots. But it got worse. The Kethri's entire culture was built around something they called the Singing Stones, massive crystal formations where they'd been burying their dead for thousands of years. These weren't just graves. They were the foundation of everything the Kethri believed about life, death, and their place in the universe. Asking them to leave would be like asking humans to abandon every cemetery, every memorial, every trace of their ancestors. The survey teams tried to explain this to them. They used gentle words and diplomatic language, but the message was clear. Look, we understand this is hard, but you're all going to die if you stay here. We can maybe evacuate a few thousand of you, but you'll have to leave everything behind and probably won't survive the psychological trauma anyway. The Kethri's response was simple and devastating. Then we choose to die as ourselves rather than live as strangers. That's when the Galactic Council made their decision. In a closed session that lasted exactly 47 minutes, they classified the Kethri situation as an acceptable loss scenario. The official report was filed under subsection 7G of the Emergency Response Protocol, which basically meant, we've determined that saving these people would cost more than we're willing to spend. The galaxy had bigger problems to worry about. The Hegemony-Dominion war was escalating. Trade routes needed protection. There were profitable mining operations to defend, and politically important species to keep happy. The Kethri, with their dying star and their stubborn refusal to be practical about survival, just didn't make the priority list. So the mighty Galactic Council moved on. The Kethri became a footnote in a report that most council members never bothered to read. Just another species that would quietly fade into extinction while the galaxy got on with more important business. But the galaxy hadn't counted on one thing. Eventually, humans would find them. Captain David Riley had been commanding deep space missions for 12 years, and he thought he'd seen everything the galaxy could throw at him. dead civilizations, abandoned colonies, the occasional space anomaly that made a science officer get way too excited about particles and energy readings. The Endurance was on what they called a routine sweep, basically flying around looking for anything interesting in unexplored sectors. Riley was actually catching up on paperwork in his quarters when Lieutenant Tommy Chin burst through his door without even knocking. "Captain, you need to hear this," Tommy said, his face flushed with excitement. "We're picking up a distress signal, but it's different." Different was putting it mildly. Most distress signals they encounter were automated beacons left behind by long-dead crews, or the occasional merchant vessel that had wandered too far from shipping lanes. This signal was clearly artificial, but it had something else, a musical quality that made the hair on Riley's arm stand up. The signal led them to Keth Prime, and Riley's first impression was that they were looking at the most beautiful dying world he'd ever seen. The planet sparkled like a giant jewel against the backdrop of its failing star. Crystal formations jutted up from the surface in patterns that looked almost deliberately artistic. But their sensors told the real story: atmospheric degradation, failing life support systems, and a population that was slowly suffocating. When they established first contact, Riley expected to find the usual scenario: desperate survivors begging for immediate evacuation. Instead, he found something that broke his heart and amazed him at the same time. The Kethri weren't just lying down waiting to die. Despite having technology that was centuries behind human standards, they were fighting for every single day. Their engineers worked around the clock trying to jury-rig failing atmospheric processors with spare parts that should have given out years ago. Their teachers still held classes for children who might not live to see adulthood, making sure their culture would survive even if they didn't. But what really got to Riley was watching a group of young Kethri learning what they called star songs, melodies about distant suns and worlds they'd never visit. The kids sang with such pure joy, completely unaware that they were probably singing about places they'd died before ever seeing. Through their universal translator, Riley learned the crushing truth about the Kethri situation. Every major galactic civilization had received their distress calls. The Council, the Trade Federation, even some of the smaller regional powers. The responses were all variations of the same theme: "We're very sorry, but there's nothing we can do. Good luck." Riley spent 3 days in orbit around Keth Prime, officially conducting first contact protocols, but really just trying to process what he was seeing. His crew was getting restless. Chief Engineer Kate Murphy kept coming to him with technical solutions. "Captain, their atmospheric systems are ancient, but they're not that different from our early models. We can help them." Science Officer Dr. Ben Patterson was even more direct. "Sir, with our technology, we could probably extend their atmospheric systems by decades. Maybe even help them develop long-term solutions." But Riley knew the rules. First contact with a dying civilization meant observation, documentation, and filing a complete report with Earth Command. It didn't mean playing savior to every species they encountered. When he finally transmitted his report back to Earth, the response came faster than he'd expected. Admiral Janet Foster's message was crystal clear. "Captain Riley, express our sympathy for their situation, file all relevant data, and continue with your assigned mission. Earth Command understands this is difficult, but we cannot involve ourselves in every galactic tragedy we encounter." Riley stared at that message for a long time. He thought about those Kethri children singing about stars they'd never see. He thought about engineers working themselves to exhaustion trying to buy their people just a few more months of breathable air. He thought about entire species that refused to give up, even when the rest of the galaxy had written them off. That's when he made a decision that would change everything. Riley called his senior staff to the bridge and looked each of them in the eye. "I'm about to do something that'll probably end my career," he told them. "Anyone who doesn't want to be part of this can file an objection in their personal log right now." Not one person moved. Riley opened a direct channel to Keth Prime and began transmitting. Not just a sympathy message, but detailed technical specifications for human atmospheric processing technology, blueprints for recycling systems, power generation schematics, everything the Kethri would need to not just survive, but actually improve their situation. The transmission took 6 hours to complete. When it was done, Riley sat back in his captain's chair and waited for Earth Command to figure out what he'd just done. He didn't have to wait long. Admiral Foster's next message was considerably less polite than the first one, but by then it was too late. The seed was planted, and Riley had a feeling this was just the beginning of something much bigger than one rogue captain's act of defiance. Captain Riley's transmission to Keth Prime did more than just send technical data. It lit a fuse that nobody saw coming. Within 48 hours, Earth Command had Riley under formal investigation and was demanding he return to Earth immediately for disciplinary hearings. But something interesting happened while bureaucrats were drafting their angry memos. The story leaked. Some junior communications officer on Riley's crew had recorded the captain's transmission and shared it with his girlfriend back on Mars. She shared it with her friends, who shared it with their networks, and within a week, the entire human internet was buzzing with videos of those crystal beings trying to save their dying world. The footage of Kethri children learning songs about stars they'd never see went viral across dozens of human colonies. Earth's government tried to control the narrative, issuing statements about unauthorized interference and violations of first contact protocols. They painted Riley as a rogue officer who'd acted outside his authority and put humanity at risk of galactic sanctions. But public opinion was moving in a completely different direction. The turning point came when Rebecca Martinez, CEO of Titan Industries, held a press conference that changed everything. Earth Command says Captain Riley broke protocol, she announced to a packed auditorium. I say he broke something much more important. He broke the cycle of looking the other way when people need help. Martinez announced that Titan Industries would fund the first civilian relief mission to Keth Prime, and she personally guaranteed safe passage for any volunteer who wanted to join. That opened the floodgates. Within days, other corporations were announcing their own support programs. Stellar Dynamics offered to provide ships and fuel. New Tech Solutions promised equipment and technical support. Even smaller companies got involved. A restaurant chain on Europa started donating a percentage of their profits to what they called the Kethri Relief Fund. But the real surprise came from humanity's outer colonies. When the Galactic Council formally warned Earth about potential sanctions for supporting an economically non-viable species, 3 entire star systems told the Council exactly where they could stick their sanctions. The colony leaders weren't subtle about it either. Governor Paul Thompson of the Centauri system issued a statement that made headlines across human space. If being part of galactic civilization means watching good people die while we follow bureaucratic rules, then maybe it's time to rethink what civilization actually means. New Brisbane Colony went even further, formally declaring independence from Earth specifically, so they could continue supporting the Kethri without putting the home planet at diplomatic risk. Other colonies quickly followed suit. It was like watching dominoes fall, except each domino was an entire star system willing to risk everything to help strangers on a dying world. The first wave of human volunteers arrived at Keth Prime 6 months after Riley's initial transmission. Dr. Lisa Park was among them, and she expected to spend maybe a few weeks helping the Kethri understand human atmospheric technology before heading home. Instead, she ended up living in the crystal caverns beneath Keth Prime's surface for over a year, and what she discovered there changed both species forever. The Kethri's underground cities were unlike anything humans had ever seen. They'd grown their settlements the same way coral grows, slowly, naturally, with each crystal formation serving multiple purposes. Living spaces, workshops, and communal areas all flowed together in organic patterns that seemed almost alive. Dr. Park quickly realized that the Kethri weren't just good at growing crystal structures. They were brilliant at it. Their understanding of crystal lattice formation was centuries ahead of human science. But what made her really excited was discovering how perfectly their crystal-growing abilities matched up with human atmospheric technology. It was like finding 2 puzzle pieces that had been made for each other. Dr. Park later explained in her reports back to Earth. Human atmospheric processors needed precise crystalline filters to work efficiently, and the Kethri could grow those filters to exact specifications. Meanwhile, Kethri crystal growing techniques needed the kind of controlled environment that human atmospheric systems could provide perfectly. Working together, they started creating hybrid technologies that neither species could have developed alone. Crystal-based air purification systems that were more efficient than anything in human space. atmospheric recycling networks that could run for decades without maintenance, power systems that use crystal resonance to generate clean energy from stellar radiation. But the technology was only part of the story. Word about the Kethri-human collaboration spread through human space like wildfire, and volunteers started arriving faster than anyone could coordinate them. Teachers came to learn about Kethri culture and help preserve their songs and stories. Doctors arrived to study Kethri biology and see if human medical technology could help with their unique physiology. Mining engineers brought expertise in deep core extraction techniques. Each new arrival brought more than just technical skills. They brought something the Kethri had lost somewhere along the way: hope. For the first time in generations, young Kethri started making plans that extended beyond just surviving another few months. Parents began believing their children might actually have futures. Engineers started designing improvements instead of just emergency repairs. The psychological change was as dramatic as any technological breakthrough. The Kethri had spent so long being told they were doomed that they'd started believing it themselves. But watching humans risk everything to help them, giving up comfortable lives, defying their own governments, traveling across the galaxy to work in crystal caverns, showed them something they'd forgotten. Sometimes, being worth saving isn't about your strategic value or economic potential. Sometimes, it's just about being people who deserve a chance. Dr. Lisa Park had been living in the crystal caverns of Keth Prime for 14 months when she noticed something that didn't make sense. Every morning, just before dawn, the Kethri would gather in the central chamber and sing. Not just a few of them. The entire community would join in these haunting melodies that seemed to make the crystal walls themselves vibrate in response. Park had always assumed it was some kind of religious ceremony. The songs were ancient, passed down through countless generations, and the Kethri treated them with the kind of reverence that humans usually reserve for their most sacred traditions. But Dr. Park was a scientist first, and there was something about those morning songs that kept bugging her. The breakthrough came when she was working late one night with Harmony of Deep Crystals, a young Kethri engineer who became her closest collaborator. They were trying to solve a problem with their atmospheric recycling system. The crystalline filters were working perfectly, but the power fluctuations from Keth Prime's dying star kept causing system failures. That's when they heard it. Even though it was well past midnight, someone was singing in the lower caverns. The melody was different from the morning songs. Sadder, more complex, with harmonies that seemed to twist and spiral through the crystal chambers. Who's singing at this hour? Park asked. Harmony's crystalline features shifted in what Park had learned was the Kethri equivalent of a smile. That is old echo of starlight. She sings the deep songs when she cannot sleep, the songs that call to the dying light. Something clicked in Park's mind. She pulled up the sensor data they'd been collecting on stellar radiation patterns, and her jaw dropped. The radiation fluctuations weren't random. They followed a pattern, and that pattern matched the frequency of the Kethri songs almost perfectly. Harmony, she said slowly, how long have your people been singing these songs? Since the first crystals grew, Harmony replied. Since our ancestors learned to hear the star's voice and sing back to it. But surely you know this? Your people have instruments that measure such things. Park stared at her screens, her heart racing. The Kethri hadn't just been singing religious songs for centuries. They'd been unconsciously performing stellar engineering. Their crystal singing was actually influencing the radiation patterns of their dying star, extending its life through harmonic resonance. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of discovery. Park brought in Dr. Robert Hayes, a stellar physicist who'd arrived with the latest wave of human volunteers. Together with Harmony and several other Kethri singers, they began mapping the relationship between the ancient songs and stellar behavior. What they found was mind-blowing. The Kethri had developed, entirely by instinct and tradition, one of the most sophisticated stellar engineering techniques anyone had ever seen. Their songs created harmonic frequencies that resonated to the planet's crystal core, which in turn generated subtle gravitational waves that influenced their star's nuclear processes. They've been doing this for thousands of years, Dr. Hayes explained to the growing team of human and Kethri researchers. Without even knowing it, they've been keeping their star alive centuries longer than it should have lasted naturally. But here's where it got really exciting. The Kethri songs were incredibly effective, but they were also limited by the singer's physical capabilities and the natural crystal formations. Human technology could amplify and focus those harmonic frequencies in ways the Kethri had never imagined possible. Working together, they designed what they called a stellar resonance amplifier, a hybrid device that combined human engineering with Kethri crystal growing techniques. The amplifier could take the harmonic patterns from Kethri songs and broadcast them directly into space, creating much stronger gravitational waves than natural singing alone. The first test was terrifying and amazing at the same time. Harmony and 12 other singers stood around the amplifier, performing one of their most complex stellar songs while human technicians monitored equipment that had never been used for anything like this before. For 30 minutes, nothing seemed to happen. Then the star responded. Keth Prime's dying sun, which had been fluctuating wildly for decades, suddenly stabilized. The radiation patterns smoothed out. The solar flares had been wreaking havoc with planetary systems calmed to gentle, steady pulses. But the real magic happened 3 days later. For the first time in living memory, auroras appeared in Keth Prime's sky. Not the weak, intermittent light shows they'd occasionally seen before, but brilliant cascades of color that dance across the crystal cities like celebration fireworks. The Kethri were amazed, but the humans were absolutely stunned. According to their calculations, the stellar resonance amplifier hadn't just stabilized the star, it had actually begun reversing some of the damage from its death spiral. With regular use of the amplifier, Keth Prime's star could potentially burn steadily for another 1,000 years. Word of the breakthrough spread through human space faster than anyone expected. The images were incredible, renewed auroras painting the sky, while human ships worked alongside crystal singers. Their technologies merged in ways that neither species could have achieved alone. When those images reached Galactic Council space, the reaction was immediate and profound. The Council had spent centuries dismissing Kethri culture as primitive superstition, but now they were seeing evidence of stellar engineering that surpassed anything in their archives. Humanity hadn't just saved the Kethri from extinction. They'd helped them unlock the true potential of knowledge that had been hiding in plain sight for generations. The dying race that everyone had written off had just become the most advanced stellar engineers in the galaxy, and humans had been the key to helping them realize it. The message was crystal clear. Sometimes the most incredible breakthroughs come from combining ancient wisdom with fresh perspectives. 2 years after Captain David Riley first answered that desperate distress call, anyone arriving at Keth Prime would have trouble believing this was the same dying world that the Galactic Council had written off as a lost cause. The transformation wasn't just dramatic. It was absolutely unprecedented in galactic history. The planet's surface now sparkled with a completely new kind of architecture. Soaring crystal spires grew alongside human-built atmospheric processors, creating structures that looked like they'd been designed by artists rather than engineers. The hybrid buildings weren't just beautiful. They were incredibly functional, with crystal walls that could adjust their transparency and thermal properties based on the star's radiation levels, while human environmental systems maintained perfect atmospheric conditions throughout. But the real change wasn't in the buildings, it was in the people. Both species had been transformed by their partnership in ways nobody had expected. The Kethri, who had spent generations simply trying to survive one more day, were now looking centuries into the future. Young Kethri were studying human engineering alongside their traditional crystal singing, creating a new generation that understood both ancient wisdom and cutting-edge technology. Meanwhile, humans who had come to Keth Prime as volunteers were discovering that living alongside the Kethri was changing them too. They were learning to think in longer timescales, to see connections between technology and culture that human science had never considered. Dr. Lisa Park, who had originally planned to stay for a few weeks, was now permanently stationed on Keth Prime as director of the Kethri Human Cooperative. The organization had grown from a small relief effort into something that was revolutionizing how both species approach technology and exploration. We're not just sharing knowledge, Dr. Park explained to reporters who visited the planet. We're creating entirely new ways of understanding the universe. The Kethri see patterns in stellar behavior that our instruments can detect, but our minds struggle to comprehend. Meanwhile, our technology can amplify and focus their natural abilities in ways that seemed impossible just a few years ago. The cooperative's achievements were staggering. Their stellar engineering techniques had stabilized not just Keth Prime Star, but 3 other dying stars in nearby systems. Their crystal resonance navigation system was allowing ships to plot courses through space with an accuracy that made traditional methods look primitive. They'd even developed new forms of interstellar communication that use harmonic frequencies to send messages across vast distances almost instantaneously. But perhaps the most important breakthrough was something that couldn't be measured by scientific instruments. They'd proven that true partnership between species was possible. When the Galactic Council finally sent a delegation to investigate what they were calling the Keth Prime situation, they expected to find a human charity operation, keeping a dying species on life support. Instead, they found a thriving civilization that was pushing the boundaries of known science. Ambassador Nexus Prime of the Council's Oversight Committee arrived with a full diplomatic retinue, expecting to conduct standard damage assessments and treaty negotiations. What he found left him speechless for the first time in his 40-year diplomatic career. The delegation's tour began in the orbital shipyards, where Kethri crystal singers worked alongside human engineers to grow spacecraft that were stronger and more efficient than anything in Council space. Then they visited the research centers, where joint human Kethri teams were developing technologies that neither species could have imagined alone. Finally, they stood in the central plaza of New Harmony City, watching auroras dance across the sky from a star that should have died years ago. Harmony of Deep Crystals, now serving as a Kethri representative to the Cooperative's governing council, addressed the stunned delegation beneath those brilliant auroras. Her words were translated into dozens of galactic languages, but their meaning was crystal clear in any tongue. Your species see endings where humans see beginnings. You calculated our extinction and moved on to more profitable ventures. But humans saw our potential and chose to nurture it instead of abandoning it. Perhaps this is why the galaxy needs them, not as another member species, but as teachers who can show us what partnership truly means. The Council's own scientists were forced to admit what they'd been trying to deny for months. Their preliminary reports were devastating to the Council's reputation. By refusing to abandon the economically non-viable Kethri, humanity had stumbled onto stellar engineering principles that could help countless worlds throughout the galaxy. The techniques developed on Keth Prime could extend the lives of dying stars, stabilize unstable systems, and even help younger stars burn more efficiently. But the real revelation was deeper than just technology. The human approach to the Kethri crisis had revealed something fundamental about how galactic civilization had been operating. For centuries, the Council had made decisions based on economic calculations and strategic priorities. They had become experts at writing off species that didn't meet their criteria for viability. Humans had shown them a different way. Instead of calculating costs and benefits, they'd simply asked, "What if we refuse to give up on each other?" The answer to that question was transforming the galaxy. Within months of the Council's visit, dozens of species were reaching out to the Kethri Human Cooperative, asking for help with problems their own governments had declared unsolvable. Dying worlds, failing ecosystems, species facing extinction, all the cases that had been filed away as acceptable losses were suddenly being reopened. Captain Riley, who had been quietly promoted and given command of the Cooperative's exploration fleet, summed it up perfectly in his final report to Earth Command. Sometimes the galaxy's greatest breakthroughs come from simply refusing to give up on each other. The Kethri taught us that wisdom and potential can exist in the most unlikely places. We just had to be willing to look.